think we can get started.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you. So I have the honor and the pleasure of introducing Rabbi Jonathan Porath, who my sister Nancy, who is here, and I had the distinct joy and pleasure of traveling to Russia with in the summer of 2018. We were with a group of about half Israelis and half Americans, maybe about 30 of us on the trip, who were invited to go with this expert, Rabbi Jonathan Porath, who had made many, many trips to Russia over many decades and was a true expert on how Jewish life changed and developed over many decades. And of course, it continues to right up to our day. And what we discovered was when we were on this trip in the summer of 2018 was how Rabbi Porath is an amazing storyteller and has incredible stories to tell about visiting Russia and knowing very well the Jewish community there from as early as the 1960s. Did you start in the 60s? All the way up to our visit in 2018, and then I think he had one more visit after that. And as you all know, Russia's been sadly, tragically in the news every day in their headlines for the last year because of its incursion into Ukraine. And of course, there are Jews in Ukraine and in Russia. And so what really started this session today was as the Jewish community, what are we called again, Steve? I can never get the
Jewish Community Legacy Project.
Legacy Project. We were convening as a group of people from various communities in the Midwest to see how we could work together. And I said, and people were talking about Ukraine, and I said, gee, I know someone who, knows a lot about the world over there, and especially the Jewish life there. Let me reach out to him and see if, what he has to say about the situation. And he told me, I talked to Rabbi Porath, and he said, I'm writing a book. I'm going to have a book published. And it came out since then. Here We Are All Jews, in which he recounts all of these stories going way back to the 60s up to the present day of all of his experiences. And they are really incredible. And so he agreed to do this talk for us. You may remember that it was originally going to be back in December, and we feel so grateful. And we want to say to you, Rabbi Porath, that we're so happy that you are healthy and able to do the talk now, and that your health crisis was averted, because that's why we couldn't have the program in December. And so we welcome you to come and share with us about your stories and your reflections, and then we'll leave some time for Q&A at the end, where we hope, among other things, that Rabbi Porath will comment on the current situation. Go ahead.
Thank you, Rabbi Feingold. First, it's a great pleasure to be together. I'm from Jerusalem. I received from Steve a few months ago an amazing list. Appleton, Bloomington, Galesburg, Kenosha, La Crosse, Michigan City, Munster, Rockford, Oshkosh, Terriot, Waukesha, Wausau, Beloit, Racine, Benton Harbor. That's quite a collection of communities. Great, kol hakavod, great for you guys for maintaining and growing Jewish life wherever you are. As personally, I spoke in Benton Harbor. And I found out that my uncle Sam was a rabbi in Rockford in the late 1930s. And I was a rabbi in Norman, Oklahoma. So there's a certain specialness about coming from small towns. And when I worked for the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, which some of you may have heard about, which is funded by our federations, which helps to take care of Jews all over the world. I was the country director for the Urals and for Central Russia. So to your names, we can add Murmansk and Vorkuta and Ufa, and we'll talk about it as we go ahead. I think one thing which is characteristic of where all of us come from, in our communities, everybody counts. Now, we take it for granted, but one shouldn't take it for granted. When you're in a smaller town, if a new face shows up to the organization or shul, you're really happy to see them. In the big cities, you can get lost, but here you really can't. And I want to thank the committee for bringing this together for my new book. As we mentioned here, We Are All Jews, and it will give a commercial available on Amazon.com. Buy them while they're still hot. Okay, they're available. From 1965 to 2019, as Rabbi Feingold mentioned, I visited the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, 175 times. That's a real count. Most of the times when I was working for the Joint, I commuted back and forth from Israel to the former Soviet Union every month for 15 years, which is a lot of frequent flyer points. So like they knew me pretty well. I was in more than 50 cities, met thousands and thousands of Jews. And I want to look at my experiences through a particular lens as a Steve. Steve, raise your hands. We all see you. Excellent. Steve wrote a letter after a meeting we had, and he says, Rabbi Porath will focus on Jewish life in the periphery, both in the former Soviet Union and our own communities as well. What makes for a community spirit? What binds us together? What challenges do we face? What do we all share around the world? Which that was a great question. Only I noted that from Steve's formulation of Jewish life in the peripheries to the wonderful poster, which I think, Mark, you put together. Is that right, Mark? Yes, it says not Jewish life in the periphery, but it says Jewish life on the periphery. It's a big difference. Jewish life in the peripheries, if you live in a small town, I got that. Jewish life on the periphery, you can live in a city with millions of people and still be peripheral. And I want to just begin with that kind of a sense. I saw in the Soviet Union, Soviet Jews, even those living in cities with 250,000 or 500,000 Jews, which is kind of beyond us, like Leningrad and Moscow, were on the total periphery of Jewish life. Talking about, my first trip was in 65. No Jewish life, no schools, no Jewish organizations, no Jewish publications, something which may seem simple, no Jewish bookstores, but if you wanted to buy something, there was no place to buy it. You wanted to buy, first you didn't know what a bar mitzvah was, but if you had wanted to buy a bar mitzvah talis, there was no place, they didn't exist. There were synagogues, but they were all state controlled. They had officials running them who were not like our ritual vice presidents or gabbaim. They worked for the Ministry of Cults. They were Jewish, and their main job was to keep the local Jews separate from any visiting foreigners. That was a major job. And to kind of support the Soviet government, whatever that you did, everything was under Jewish control, under government control. I started my first trip in 1965. I came as a student. I came at Hebrew University. I was a student at Brandeis for my junior year. I always was just interested in Russian studies. And I looked at a map and I saw that Haifa to Odessa wasn't so far. It was just a boat ride away. So I got to Odessa and I found my way to Leningrad. This is in March or April of 1965. And I go into the shul, beautiful old Morris structure. And there are people inside, people coming outside, carrying like shopping bags with something inside wrapped in the copy of Pravda, which meant truth, which was all a lie, which was the Soviet Party's ruling paper in Moscow, in the Soviet Union. They were carrying something, and inside I saw some men working with big machines and with looked like white baker's hats. And indeed, it turns out they were baking Soviet matzah. Soviet Jews by then didn't have a Seder, didn't have Haggadahs, all the kinds of things that are familiar to us, but matzah was still important to them, under state control. I went to synagogue to shul in Shabbat morning, and in the middle of Shabbat services, these are Orthodox synagogues, in walks a Soviet film crew, turns on the Klieg lights, and begins photographing the services in progress. People were murmuring, this isn't in the spirit of the Sabbath, and the rabbi just held the Torah and walked in and stood in front of the congregation and proceeded to recite the prayer over the Father of peace in the entire world, the Soviet Union. May God bless her. And I realized everything here It's under state control, no matter what you're going to do. Nathan Sharansky, perhaps you've heard the name, one of the real refuseniks of the struggle against the Soviet government of Israel. He would say that the only thing you knew about being a Jew in Soviet times was it was bad. And how did you know? Because your internal passport, like your driver's license, which you had to show every place, said the word Jew in your in the fifth line, nationality Jewish. So it wasn't enough to have A pluses. Didn't help if you were Jew. You had to have like A plus plus plus. And then maybe if you're lucky, you'll get into a school like on the periphery. And Jews fought as much as they could in their own ways to achieve success in Soviet society. Though, starting in the mid-1960s, even totally disconnected Soviet Jews began to gather once a year to be Jewish. Anybody know what holiday there was? When did the Soviet Jews get together? It was on Simchas Torah. After the end of the holidays, gathering with Torahs and dancing. Did you ever read a book that changed your life? I did. Here's the book. It's called Jews of Silence by Elie Wiesel. He wrote about his trip to Moscow and Leningrad and 5 other cities in 1965. And he described that the front of the synagogue on Arkhipov Street in Moscow was packed with young Jews. Now, I'd been to Moscow, and I didn't see a single young Jew. I was incredulous. How could that be? How did he see young Jews? I didn't see any young Jews. So I decided I would go myself to check. So I find myself in the streets of Moscow for the end of the high holidays in 1968, surrounded by tens of thousands of young Soviet Jews who would not go in synagogue. There, they knew they were being spied upon. They wait outside. It was like a giant outdoor wedding party. People teeming around. They were desperate to be Jewish, but they didn't know how. They knew nothing. For example, all the songs that we know, David, Melech Yisrael, yes, Hava, Nagila, they never heard them. I thought I'd come to be, an observer. It turns out that I knew the songs they didn't know, so I began leading singing in Moscow in 16 and Simchas Torah. How many times can you sing David Melech Yisrael? A lot. You can sing it over and over. You sing it 25 times and you rest and you sing something else. And you sing and sing and sing and you're kind of exhausted. And I gathered some of the group around me and I taught them the one Russian Jewish song I knew. Niet, niet, ni ba'yusya nikavo, tolka boga navo. I'm afraid of no one except for one God. But I whispered the words because the words were seditious, even illegal in Soviet Russia. But I said the words, they didn't sing the words that way. They heard my song, began to yell out, Tolka Boga, only one God, only one God. I was scared to death, but they were fearless. I realized the power, the force they felt. And if you've been to Moscow, as some of you have, you'll know that the synagogue is about a 15-minute walk from Red Square, whereas Lenin is buried in his mausoleum. So I got the image that perhaps Lenin would turn over in his grave if he knew that Soviet Jews were singing David Melech Yisrael and Simchas Torah. I saw a young woman there and I said to her, Shalom. She says to me, Shalom. What is not to shalom? What does the word shalom mean? She never heard the word shalom. So I said, Zdravstvuyte, das svidanya, Emir, hello, goodbye, and peace. Near the end of the evening, there were a number of young people together and I joined them. And they began asking me what was life in Israel, life in America. They were very excited. They knew I'd come 7,000 miles just to be with them for no other purpose. There was one tall young man there, and I spoke to him at first in Russian, and he wouldn't respond. Then in Hebrew, no answer, English, and back to Russian. I asked him, why won't you speak to me? And he stood at his full height, and he said proudly, Ich bin a Yid. His language was Yiddish. That's what a Soviet Jew, a proper Soviet Jew, felt. Now, I had two feelings. One was a feeling of extraordinary joy at being there, but also a feeling of sadness. I was certain that I was witnessing the demise of Soviet Jewry. After all, how could Jewish power ever compete with Soviet power? Those of us I was born in the 1940s, born in the 40s and the 50s. In those days, the Soviet Union seemed invincible. Cuba around the world, so we thought the whole thing was only a fake. But it was, that the Jews managed to get out was amazing. How did you even find Jews then? First of all, you had to come through customs. After I went to Russia in '68, I was invited by the conservative movement youth group, United Synagogue Youth, or USY, to lead a trip of Jewish high school kids to the Soviet Union. And I did it in '69, '71, '2, '3, '4. And I've been corresponding with the kids who then were 17, and now they're 67 or 70 with grandchildren. And I asked them for their responses, and they said they can't figure out how come their parents gave them permission to go. I don't know, but they did. So we had two buses in 1972 with USYers, high school kids. I was in the front bus. My colleague Rabbi Turetsky was in the second bus. We were a traveling hidden Jewish bookstore. We were traveling taluses and tefillin and books and Hebrew books and records and whatever you could take with us. Put in all kinds of corners away. We pull up, it's midnight, and the sun is shining. It's a place called Vorkuta near Finland, when the sun never sets in the summer, and there are guards all around. And we pull up, and they're half asleep, and I kind of bounce off the bus in my usual, what I call my Johnny Porath mood, kind of singing along. I said, "Good evening, zdravstvuyte, dobry вечер, how you doing?" Speaking Russian. I said, "Do you want to see our bags? We're American tourists," never mentioning Jewish. He said, "No, it's too late, go through." So the whole first bus goes through. On the bus, the kids are ecstatic. We brought in piles of stuff. Nobody stopped us. Great. The second bus pulls up, and I wave to my friend, Rabbi Turetsky. He has his bag, and the customs guy says, "Show me your bag." So he sticks his hand in, and the customs guy feels something strange, and he picks it up, and he sees it's a Magen David, a Star of David. But not just one Magen David, it's 10 Magen Davids. And the Russians, who are not stupid, realize something's happening. They begin going through the bags, and they pick out books and a Bible or Hebrew text, and they throw them in the desk. And I say to them, I want to say to them, "You can't do that. It's a Bible. You can't do that with a sitter." Of course, we don't. And at the very end, the guard comes to us, who is no longer my friend, and he says to me a question, which is a big problem, because the question has 3 answers, and they're all wrong. He asked me, "Do you have books like this on your bus?" It's a big problem. If I say yes, what will he say? "Give them to me, Davai." Wrong answer. If I say no, that's even worse. Why is that worse? Because if he finds them, then we're really finished. So I gave the most honest answer I could, which was, no, I don't know, even though I gave them out. This is a real lesson in situational ethics. Are you allowed to lie to the KGB? The answer is yes, if you don't get caught. That's the answer. So he comes in our bus, and when the kids see me, it's now 3 a.m, they wave, there's somebody to see me. But when they see the green uniformed KGB guard, their hands and faces drop, and he holds up a book and gives me a siddur, a prayer book. And I got it. So I said to the kids, "Do anybody have a book like this?" And nobody moves, because I told them never to tell anybody. But that would not go. So I begin going over to one of the boys. I open up his shirt. I take out his hidden siddur. "I think you forgot this." Or one of the girls, I open up her purse. I get together 6 books, and I give it to the guard. He says, "Is that all?" It says, "I guess so." So we got into Russia. Our trip had just begun. And there's a morning blessing we say in the morning blessings in the service. We praise God, Shelo Osani Eved, who has not made us into slaves. I didn't feel like such a free person, but I was happy to say the blessing. even coming into Russia. How do you find Soviet Jews? I couldn't go up to somebody and say, hey, I'm from the Jewish Legacy Project. Shalom Aleichem. Doesn't work that way in Soviet Russia. So we're coming back from synagogue from small shul one weekday morning in Moscow on a packed bus. And I'm holding my tallis bag with me, not noticing that the Star of David, the Magen David, is facing downwards. And we turn a steep corner and the tallis bag falls on the floor and I pick it up and give it a kiss. And by chance, the Magen David is now facing upwards, which I ignored. Were it not for a young man just beyond our group, not part of our group, who's looking at me at the Magen David, and he's smiling from eye to eye, almost with tears in his eyes, middle of a crowded Moscow commuter bus. So what do you say? So if I get myself together, I said to him finally in Russian, "Вы тоже, you too?" Bus stops. He gets off and we go on. Or we're about ready to go swimming in Leningrad. There's a beach there by the main fortress, and I gave everybody in the group a Magen David just to have. Who knows who might see us? I'm getting ready to go swimming, and a Russian guy comes to us and points to the Magen David and says to me in Russian, "What's that?" I can already guess the ending, but you have to check it out. I said to him, "It's only an ornament." Begin to speak. Where are you from? He's from Leningrad. And where are your parents from? Well, my mother comes from Zhitomir, and my father comes from Berdichev. These are profoundly Jewish towns. So I said to him, those are great towns, great Jewish towns. His name was Yisrael, the doctor. He wants to leave. They're all afraid they can't get out. I said, would you like a Hebrew-Russian textbook? He said, yes, but not, I'm afraid. So I said, okay, no problem. So I got one of the books we always carried with us, and I stuck it in my shirt privately. We took a walk. I put my arm around him, gave him a hug, slipped him the book, said shalom, and walked off. Sometimes the Jews even found you. We were in Vilna at a pioneer camp, which is like a day camp, only it's for communist propaganda. I didn't want to go, but we didn't have a choice. But it turned out that I was wrong and they were right for different reasons. At the end of our tour, some local kids in the camp sang some Russian songs. It was our turn to sing. So, I knew, I could sense there were Jews there, but how do you find them without making a scene? So first we sing some Pete Seeger songs, Blowing in the Wind, whatever it is. And then I realized, I say in Russian, we're going to sing a song of world peace. And they all applaud. So I sang our favorite song of world peace, which is Oh, say Shalom Bimromav. And we sing the song. So I changed the last word. The last word is Ve'al Kol Yisrael, and for all Israel. I changed it to Ve'al Kol Ha'olam, and the whole world. You can't sing about Israel, it was too much. And afterwards, a Russian woman approaches me and says to me, tell me, what's your nationality? I say, we're all Americans, and some of us are Jews. And she said, you're all Jews. I says, yes, we're all Jews. So a Jewish lady comes up to us to find us. If we were looking for them, they were looking for us as well. By the way, I would just say to this group, to the legacy group, I have no doubt that there could be even Jews, even in our communities, that are still waiting to be asked. I know at one point, maybe a couple of years ago, perhaps, we did a survey, but who knows who came in after Corona? Are there people out there? I was a rabbi in Clark, New Jersey. I see, David, your wife is a rabbi in Waterloo, right? I spoke in Waterloo about 5 or 6 years ago. Who knows who's out there? So I'm just saying, maybe it's worth a second round to give people another chance. Just came to say hello, came shalom. We never know who's out there. When I was a Hillel rabbi at the University of Oklahoma in Norman, not known for its Jewish population, I ran ads in the paper every day. Hillel lives. And people would show up. So you never know. Just bringing it to your attention. Okay. Which Jews are welcome in Russia? Anybody who wants to come, even if they aren't certain why they're there. It was after the fall of the Soviet Union. It was May of 94. I was at one of the first screenings of the movie Schindler's List in Moscow. Remember the movie Schindler's List? powerful Jewish movie. The movie is all in black and white, except for in the middle of the movie is the girl in the red coat, and the first scene and the last scene. The first scene is in color. It's a couple on Friday evening around a Shabbat lighting candles and making Kiddush over wine, which is familiar to us. Soviet Jews never saw that. They didn't know it existed. And to see in a public movie theater a Jewish experience portrayed positively, amazing. And the very last scene, perhaps you'll recall, when Schindler's Jews and their children and grandchildren who survived because of Schindler are at his grave on Mount Zion Christian Cemetery, and there are hundreds of people, and they sing Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. Movie ends, and there's total silence in the theater, like people are stunned. Then all of a sudden you hear a clap, then more claps, and people start to clap and cheer and cry and yell. They had never seen themselves portrayed positively in public before. It was an amazing emotional release that they wanted to be Jewish, even if they themselves didn't know it. One of the challenges I found in working for the Joint in Russia from 1993 to 2008 was to find Jews who themselves didn't know what being Jewish was all about. They weren't going to synagogue, that was for sure. That had been foreclosed, because that was already not kosher for them. Had to find new ways. So we opened up a new JCC in Leningrad, in St. Petersburg, called Yesod, the St. Petersburg Jewish Community Center. And I was looking for ways to bring the people in. I heard in Israel that a Professor Alman, who was the 1915 Nobel Prize winner for economics and a religious Jew, would be in Leningrad and Petersburg. And I had contact with him. I spoke to him. Would he come and speak in the new JCC? He said, why me? I'm going to speak in the synagogue. And I said, Professor Alman, most of the Jews in Leningrad will not go to shul, but they might come to hear a Nobel Prize winning professor at the new JCC. So he agreed. And the room was packed with 300 younger people in their 20s and 30s, academics, the crowd I was looking for. He began with a video taken by Hebrew University when he received his Nobel Prize in Stockholm or Helsinki, whatever it was, and opens with a flag of Israel fluttering in the air, and him receiving, he wears a big kippah. And at the end of the evening, we had like a reception, like a kiddush afterwards, and one of the local Jews said to me, Yonatan, I never felt as proud to be a Jew as I did today. I think if we can find ways of making people proud to be Jewish, that's a good thing. I would just note, by the way, that sometimes, especially when we're successful, we've created this wonderful core group of people who love being together. We need to welcome outsiders. I know that's what the rabbis do. That's part of our job, but we're attuned to that. It's very important, especially in our nuclear congregations, to have a committee of people. If you see a new face, don't be embarrassed to say, shalom, nice to see you. When you come to town, can we help you? That people are desperate these days for some kind of connections. I think it's very important. Everybody has something to contribute, even to inspire others. I was responsible for Jewish life for the Joint in the Urals. A friend of mine, Dr. Seymour Epstein, was responsible for Siberia. So we said, let's get together and have a seminar together. We called it Elul in Omsk. Omsk was a Siberian city. I'm certain that nobody there knew that Elul was the name of the Hebrew month before the high holidays, but we did. So we had 75 people who would come from all over the place. In the morning, we blew the shofar, as we do every day before the high holidays. And I showed them the shofar, and I said, do you know that you know what this is? And they smiled, sure, we know it's a shofar. I said, have you ever heard the shofar blown? They said, never, because there are no synagogues. They never saw it. They never heard it. Things we take for granted, Yom Kippur, bar mitzvahs, Hebrew school, Sunday, anything, totally foreign to those Soviet Jews then. We had morning services. And I asked if somebody could lead us. One man raised his hand. And I said we should open up with a morning prayer. Some of you may know it. There's a morning. Anybody recall what's the traditional morning prayer a Jew says when he gets up in the morning? Do you recall how it begins?
Moda
Lisa,
ani lefanecha.
Modeh ani. Lisa, do you know it?
Moda.
Very good.
Yeah.
Good for you. Good for you,
הודעני
Lisa.
לפניך מלך וקיים שהחזרת בי נשמתי בחמלה רבה אמונתך.
Thank you so much. We thank you, God, that we're alive in the morning. It's 11 words. For somebody who knows it, how long does it take to say? 5 seconds, 10 seconds, not more. So I simply the services. Only he didn't read it that fast. He read it as follows. He read it word by word, syllable by syllable, vowel by vowel, letter by letter. It took him 5 minutes to read the 11 words. I said to him, tell me, pray, where did you learn to read Hebrew like that? And he said he comes from Krasnoyarsk, which is east of Omsk. There were no Hebrew schools and there were no textbooks. So he taught himself to read Hebrew. And I said, do you mean to tell me you taught yourself to read Hebrew so you could speak to God in his own language? He said, yes. I said, I want you to know, no place, I can guarantee you, in the entire universe, did God get a better morning prayer than he did this morning in Omsk. And the man sat up proudly. Did he have what to be proud about? You bet. Things we take for granted, it's a great accomplishment. And whatever people can learn and want to learn, we have to encourage that. We had a Shabbat together in the Urals, and there was the head of the Jewish community in Tobolsk. Tobolsk was in Western Siberia, one of the oil cities. He said there were 100 Jews in town. Could be one of our towns, yes? So I said, I guess you must be 1% of the Jews of Tobolsk. And he said he had been to a Pesach Seder because we began a Hillel, a Jewish college group in Yekaterinburg, and they did a Seder. But he had never seen a Shabbat. He had never seen somebody light candles like this and make Kiddush and these things. So it was his first time. So I think that there are probably people like that, in our communities. You get credit for whatever you know, whatever you can contribute, it's just fine. I saw it, especially when these Russian Jews began coming to Israel. They began coming in 1968 or 69 originally. The doors opened a crack, and you couldn't come directly from Moscow, Tel Aviv. You had to go via Vienna. So I got permission from the Jewish agency to go and meet Russian Jews. I want to be the first person saying a shalom to Russian Jews coming to freedom. So I go to the Westbahnhof, the train station in Vienna, and you wait until everybody's left the train, you see who's left. And there were two older people. One had an Israeli flag and a blue serge suit. And I said to him, Shalom Aleichem, Ma Shaleimchem, how are you? Vasmach dir in Yiddish. And he says to me in Hebrew, which I'll translate, Ani loy dibarti ivris, ze shloishim shona, bani noisei le'eretz Yisrael. In a European accent, he says, I haven't spoken Hebrew in 30 years, and I'm going to the land of Israel. A Jew from Vilna was making his way. The highlight when the Jews came to in the 1980s and 90s, they began coming in mass. In 1991 and 92, about 500 Russian Jews, former Soviet Jews, arrived in Israel every day for 2 years. Okay, 750 days times 500 days, it's about 350,000 Jews arriving every day. And a number of them, maybe a couple of hundred, came to our neighborhood in Ramot. And we opened programs for them. We had a Friday evening program. I gave it this brand new creative name. I called it an Oneg Shabbat. Rabbi Feingold, I like the name. Pretty clever, huh? Oneg, yes. I would give out, there would come to hundreds of Soviet Jews who would give out copies of the Bible and copies of the Siddur. I made a song sheet in transliteration of Shalom Aleichem, David Melech Yisrael. So they didn't know the songs. I would ask, we were talking about keeping kosher. I would say, who would like to keep kosher? And 20 people raised their hands. And I spoke to one of the ladies, Bella from Kharkiv in Ukraine. I said, Bella, why did you raise your hand? She says, when we were in the Soviet Union, I was in Komsomol, the Communist Youth League. I was in the Communist Party, but that's all we knew. Now that we're in Israel, I want a kosher home. That's what it means to me right now. The high point was on Yom Kippur afternoon. We had a break in the services, perhaps you do also, and we advertised high holiday Yizkor memorial services in Russian. And hundreds of Russian Jews came to shul, dressed in white and tennis shoes. This was their day to be in shul. We did the recitation of sins, the Al-Chet in Russian, and I wanted to do a memorial prayer, a Yizkor prayer in memory of Soviet Jews, but there was none, so we wrote one. May God, remember those who passed away, Soviet Jews who passed away in the Red Army, in the partisans, in the Gulag and Stalin's terror, before they were able to reach the land of Israel. And the service came together with reciting the mourner's Kaddish at the end. Now they were new, so they barely knew any Hebrew. So they recited word for word, almost syllable for syllable after me, the words of the Kaddish. Yit Gadal, Veyit Kadash, Shemei Rabbah, which culminates in a crescendo, Oseh Shalom Bimromav, Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu, V'al Kol Yisrael V'imru, Amen. The intensity, the silence were deafening. I had never been privileged to be in such a thoughtful, a quote, religious, devoted congregation. They didn't know a word of Hebrew. They davened with such intensity. For the first time in their lives, they could remember their loved ones with all the Jews of all the world as free Jews in the land of Israel. So they taught us, Israelis and American Jews, how to be Jewish by seeing them.
Jonathan, I hate to interrupt you, but I want to make sure that we have time for Q&A. Do you have something you want to just wrap up what you
I will conclude. Very good. Very good. I met a woman named Maria in a pioneer camp in Kiev. She was in the Soviets. She was so enthusiastic to see us, and I said we were going to Israel, and she said, "Bog's night, God knows that you and I are one." Soviet Jews, Russian Jews, Jews of smaller communities in the Midwest and Israel, we are one people, especially in these times. And so I'm so thankful to your own rabbinic leadership and to Steve for bringing us together. I think it's one of the secrets of continuing Jewish life, and really, God bless you from Jerusalem for all that you're doing. Toda.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And, I'm sure you can tell that this is just like the tip of the iceberg of the stories that Jonathan has to tell. And if you want to know more, I mean, his book is like what he shared with us just now. It's just full of anecdotes of stories like that that go up really to the present time. And when we had the privilege of being there in 2018, we saw how Jewish life had just flourished incredibly in Moscow and St. Petersburg, or former Leningrad. Those are the two places that we had the privilege to be at, but as well, it had flourished in other places. And so as just the first question, because I know people in our group want to hear about this, Jonathan, can you just say a word about what's it like for the Jews in Russia right now? And in the Ukraine, to the extent that you can share.
Okay, first of all, Ukraine has been attacked by Russia. Ukraine is extraordinarily courageous, unbelievably courageous. As long as the West will support them, they'll maintain themselves. They can't do it by themselves. It's only with Western support, and that depends largely upon us. in the areas of eastern Ukraine, especially in Donetsk, Jewish life basically is closed down, more or less. But in western Ukraine, or in central and western around Kiev and those areas, it goes on. Chabad is very active. There are also Reformed congregations in Kiev that are still functioning. There are Jewish camps. People who initially had left had come back. But the fighting is going to, as the fighting season is going to start again, when the rains are over, we'll see what happens right there. But Jewish life on the ground under wartime is continuing. There are four I could decipher responses for Russian Jews. The first is shame. Soon after the war began, which was last February, I received a letter from a friend of mine. I won't mention their name, but somebody whom we may have met in our own visit. And she said to me, "Dear Jonathan," she says, "it is very hard for me to write anything these past 3 weeks. The shame is so unbearable. I don't know which words to use. I wish I never lived to the moment when I'd be ashamed of my country." This is a Russian Jew writing. "I was always so proud of it. We are frozen to the very bottom of my souls, but it's becoming more and more impossible every day. I don't know what will happen next." So what is shame, embarrassment? A second is flight. There are many Russian Jews. We hear about Ukrainian Jews, but in January and February, 5,000 Russian Jews or from Jewish families left Russia for Israel. And those that can't get, especially young people of draft age, are going to Georgia, Soviet Georgia, former Soviet Georgia. And we don't need a visa, just trying to escape. Exile. Some of you may have heard of Rabbi Pinchas Goldschmidt, who was the chief rabbi of Moscow. He was told, in no uncertain terms, either you support the government or bear the consequences. So he took one suitcase as if going to the airport, and he fled, and he left 30 years of his life, everything behind. And he says that anti-Semitism is growing, and the Russian Orthodox Church has made a deal with the Russian government, as the Russian Orthodox Church did with the Soviet government, so that people have to step in line. And the last really is accommodation or intimidation. The local Chabad, which is very active, there's Rabbi Beryl Lazar, and we met them when we were there, Rabbi Feingold. We went to our first big stop was at the Marina Rosh big synagogue, which is magnificent. He took the stance, some of you may know it from Jewish history, it's called the court Jews, which basically means you become subservient to whichever leader is in charge, and they give you free reign to be Jewish, and you can support them. And even when accosted, the Chabad says our job is to take care of the local Jews. We aren't involved in politics, which itself is political. But I understand that there are 150 communities. He wants to keep Jewish life alive. Is it sustainable? I don't even know. And how about the future? Everything is speculative. We say, Putin is terrible, let him go. Who knows who will follow him? There's a guy, Prigozhin, who is head of the Wagner Group, which are the armed mercenaries who are really bloodthirsty. Maybe they'll replace a Putin. In the past, Putin and the Jews got along very well. You know what's going to happen with that? Zelensky's future, he's an extraordinary of Nobel Prize proportions. What happens if in the future, the Ukrainians will have to make an accommodation with Russia? It's hard to imagine them reconquering Crimea. Will it be said, the Jew president gave away the Crimea? What will happen to the Jews? No one really knows. And America's future, there are already talking in Congress. How long will America be prepared to pay $34 billion? Will it pay this indefinitely? $2 billion, $3 billion a month? I don't know. So there are all kinds of imponderables. The biggest striking thing is that no one expected to get this far. It was clear that Kiev was going to fall on the third or fourth day of the war. The Russians would march into Kiev. It would all be over. It was wrong. The Ukrainians fought. So, we can't forecast the future. But I think your concern, Rabbi, about the future for Russian Ukrainian Jews is a very valid one. And this story is not, completed itself, and we'll have to see what happens. But I know that I've been to Russia in the former Soviet Union 175 times. There will not be 176th. Our trip, Nancy and Rabbi Feingold, was a unique window. I think those kind of trips will never be repeated. And it makes, in terms of our own lives, we have to really, embrace what we have. I see reports about anti-Semitism in the Midwest as well. Things we thought were impossible are coming back. We have to be strong wherever we are around the world.
Thank you for that summation and interpretation. Do other people have questions? Please open your mic and ask if you do. Or raise your hand.
Let me ask you, are there Russian Jews in your communities? Do you have people who came?
Oh, yes.
Do they come out? Are they involved at all? Do they take part? Nancy?
Yes, they do. Some do. There are many opportunities here in Madison, Wisconsin. We have HIAS has brought people from all over the world, and many of them are Jewish, but we brought people from all over the world as refugees here.
Including in recent years from Ukraine, right?
Yes.
Are some of them Jewish? Some of the Ukrainian immigrants Jewish? Do you know?
I don't know.
Okay.
No, I would say if they're out there, I think a light invitation, maybe for a Pesach Seder or for something not heavy, a social kind of a connection to somebody's house, or especially if you could find a Russian speaker in your congregations that could reach out to them. Or somebody who came here 30 years ago where the kids are American kids, but they're Russian speakers, that would make them, or maybe to put in our bulletins a few paragraphs in Russian, just to go fishing.
Interesting idea.
I'll speak to the Jewish social services here in Madison about that.
They have lists of names. And look, I know it's frustrating sometimes but the Russian Jews don't identify with synagogues. It's not
right.
It's natural for us. It's not natural for them. And I think if they think of synagogues, they're afraid of religion, but many of them are very close to what's called tradition, which means some non-imposing Jewish customs. You say, this is what Jews do. You want to join us, which is what we do in our synagogues. Yes? No. And people, to make people realize that they can have a place there. Maybe if they speak English, to invite them in a small group, talk about what it was like for their growing up. It takes more of an effort because they're away from home and trying to reconstitute themselves. But I think it's all you need is 1 or 2 contacts, and they're all interconnected. You find one, you find 20. So
I know in Kenosha, this is before my time, there were a couple of families, Russian families, that our community resettled in the 70s. And because we're so close to Milwaukee and Chicago, where there are significant size Russian Jewish communities, they left Kenosha to be in a bigger Russian Jewish community. Right. I wonder if some of the other smaller communities did the same thing in the 70s, if you settled any Russian families through your federations, or ours was called the Kenosha Jewish Welfare Fund at the time.
If we go looking for them, I bet you they're out there someplace. 500,000 Russian Jews came to America, so they got to be someplace. We just have to find them. If they haven't found us, that's not their fault. That's our fault. I mean, fault. It's our reason. It's our job. So we do. We outreach. We want to welcome them as part. They have to be.
I had an interesting experience of getting to know a Chicago Russian Jewish family because, unfortunately, one of their sons suffers from mental illness and was jailed in Kenosha for something that he did. And so I got to know the family by trying to help him when he was incarcerated. And but because of my connection with this family, I ended up doing the wedding for the younger son and his wife, who both, were immigrants as children, but they, basically became American and really did nothing Jewish, in terms of religious life. But when they wanted to get married, they wanted a chuppah and they wanted a rabbi. And it was in one of these Russian social halls that they have in all the big communities, where it was a completely Russian wedding, except, the wedding itself was Jewish. And so there's certain things they seek out that and when they were looking for help for their son in jail, like they came to the synagogue, they didn't know me, but they thought someone Jewish would help them.
Or for funerals. They want a rabbi for a funeral. And there are chances. When the Russians came to Israel in 1990, the first thing we did for them in our neighborhood, we had bar mitzvahs for 4 boys from ages 13 to 18. And that became the excuse, the reason to gather people together. We had invitations and we made a party out of a party. And, we're good at that kind of stuff. We're good at we're good at programming events. That's what we do. And people came.
Sorry, any other questions from other people?
Yes. I just wanted to ask the current situation for Jews in Russia. Right. It's sort of been generally understood that Putin, unlike most Russian and before that Soviet leaders, was somewhat philo-Semitic, and yet that hasn't really been made him a good person in other regards. What's going to happen when he's no longer in charge? What might happen?
I would emphasize David's point, very important point. As Sharansky said, that the first time in 1,000 years, the leader of Russia is a philo-Semite, likes Jews. And there are all kinds of stories why he likes Jews. Because he had a neighbor who was nice to him, but he's known for that. Since nobody has ever been as pro-Jewish as he was, some NAS say, by the way, was he using the Jewish community? He's a KGB agent. We now have seen the past couple of years his KGB side come out, which is mendacious, which is terrible. I think the Jews feel vulnerable because there are no liberals out there. There's no liberal party that's waiting. It's it's more ex-Soviet style. So I think especially now that Russia is closer to China and closer to Iran, it scares the Israelis. I mean, it cautions the Israelis. The Iranians are producing all kinds of drones and stuff. The sense of instability in the past year has really grown, and the Jews find themselves in the middle of it. And that's why a lot of them are trying to leave. I've been struck. I spoke with people that joined that the welfare programs, the Chasadim, which are also funded by federations, are still functioning. Elderly Russian Jews can get help, which is amazing to me. And the synagogues are still open, but people are definitely leaving, and we'll see who's left when this whole thing is over. But it does not bode well, David. It does not bode well, that's for sure.
If there's maybe one more question, we could take it, and then I'm going to give Steve Edelstein a chance to share about what's coming down for the Jewish Community Legacy Project in the next couple months. Any other questions for Rabbi Porath?
Oh.
But great to see you.
I have a question.
Yes, Alice.
Why Simchat Torah? Why? Do you have any understanding of why that was the holiday?
It's such a good question. It's not because there wasn't a history of it. Maybe because all the other holidays involve ritual or in synagogue engagement. You do something in the shul. Simchas Torah, you can be in the street and be part of it. But how did they know that? And where did that come from? And that's a big question. I mean, I was a rabbi in Clark, New Jersey. If I had 1,000 people in the parking lot of the shul who wouldn't come to my services to Simchas Torah, I would have gone outside too. That'd have been great. But the ones in shul stayed in shul. Somehow the word got out that just to come there, you felt safe. And it was the one time they had 3 or 4 hours a year to be Jewish, and they didn't want to lose it. But it's a real good question, Alice. I pondered it myself, but at Eli, I recommend Jews of Silence by Elie Wiesel as being he really tells the tell for the first time. Good question, Alice.
So, Rabbi Porath, we can't thank you enough for just giving us a taste of all that you've experienced over many years and sharing these stories with us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been great to be together.
Great.
Terrific.
And if you want to hang on for just a
I
moment.
do. I want to see what the
okay,
legacy
we'll hear
project has
from
planned
Steve
for us now.
Bettelstein, the director of the Jewish Community Legacy Project.
Thank you, Rabbi Feingold. I just want to mention a couple of things. Our organization is a nonprofit that is dedicated to really working with small congregations in and on the periphery, I would mention, dealing with sustainability and also ways to preserve your legacy through archives, oral histories, and the like. And we are trying to bring congregational leadership and clergy together in this kind of a forum to offer programs that perhaps in many respects you would be less likely to do individually as a congregation. I just want to mention we've got an upcoming program on Wednesday, April 19th, 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern, with the community shaliach from the Jewish Federation in Milwaukee, Uriah Roth, dealing with looking at both optimistic and pessimistic scenarios for the future with the change of government that's taken place in Israel. And in the month of May, more information forthcoming. We're going to be offering a pre-Shavuot study session. Traditionally, you stay up all night on Shavuot for Tikkun Leil Shavuot. I'm not sure we can call it that because it's going to be earlier in the evening. And it's also going to not be on Shavuot itself. But several of our clergy have already indicated a participation, and we'll have more information forthcoming on that. I want to thank Rabbi Feingold. I especially also, Mark Levy does all of our technical stuff. Mark, thank you so much.
Yes.
And finally, before I turn it back to Rabbi Feingold to bid us adieu, Rabbi Porath, I bought the book, and I would really commend it to everyone. It's not a tome. It's very readable, and it really brings to life all of the various stories that you've shared with us today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that.
Rabbi Feingold?
Yes, and I just want to say to the Beth Hillel folks, that program with Uriah Roth, the Shaliach, unfortunately conflicts with the night that we're going to be marking Interfaith Holocaust Remembrance. It's the day after Yom HaShoah, but that's the day the museum could host us. But we hope to get a recording of it, just like we're going to be recording this session, put it up on our YouTube channel so you could watch it later. Or, I'll put it out there if you choose to stay home and watch the Uriah Roth Zoom instead of coming to the museum for the Holocaust commemoration. That's your choice. So we're so thankful to the Jewish Community Legacy Project for bringing us all together. This is one of the many cohorts that they have. We are the upper Midwest cohort, and there are others. And it really is wonderful to be able to, if we're having a program like this, especially on Zoom, why not bring more people together? And that's what this is all about. So if you have ideas for programming, please speak to me or to your rabbi in your community. Thank you again, everybody. And thank you, especially Rabbi Porath.
Thank you. Shalom. Great to be together. Thank you.
Yeah,
Happy
everyone.
Pesach to everyone if we don't see each
Yes.
other before.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.